Hey everyone, in today's video I'm going to be showing you how to navigate from point A to point B using the features of the GPS and a few simple autopilot commands that you can use to make staying on course a whole lot easier. This is going to be a continuation of my previous video on visual flight navigation. In that video I didn't use any instruments at all to stay on course. If that's what you're interested in, I highly suggest you check it out. I'll put a link to it right above me. I'm going to be using the Cessna 172 for this video, which features the G1000 glass cockpit. Most of the planes in the game either use this exact cockpit design or they have a slight variation of it where the buttons will be in slightly different places, but for the most part all of the features are going to be the same. So even if you're flying with a different plane, the concepts will be the same, the buttons will be pretty much the same, and you should be able to easily translate it to whatever plane you're flying. The beauty of flying by GPS is that you can literally use anything you want as a waypoint. The GPS is going to keep you pointed in the right direction at all times if you know how to read it and follow it. My route is a combination of airports, VORs, and a few other nav fixes along the way between San Diego and Palm Springs. I won't be showing you how to tune and navigate with those nav aids though. I'm really going to be focusing only on how to use the GPS to get to where you're going. If this video proves popular, I'll probably end up doing some further videos on how to navigate with VORs and NDBs and other types of nav aids. Before we get going, if you do get any value out of this video, please make sure to hit like and subscribe, and if you have any comments, put them below and I'll make sure to get back to you. Alright, with that done, let's get into the cockpit and start learning about how to navigate with the GPS. Alright, so the game has loaded and I'm going to do a few little setup things just to prepare myself to be able to follow the GPS flight path a little bit easier. So the first thing I'm actually going to do is turn off the inset here. I don't find it very useful. It's a little bit too small to be of use anyways, and we're going to be using the real instrument right here to follow our flight path much more accurately than we could with this little inset. Next, I need to set myself into GPS mode. So to do that, all I've got to do is press the CDI button until I see it shows GPS and that it's turned the purple magenta color. Now the navigation computer is going to follow the GPS flight path that I've loaded into it. Next up, if I switch over to the right-hand multifunction display, there's a few other things I can look at as well. So the first one, if I hit the flight plan button, you're going to see that we can see every single one of the waypoints that we're going to be hitting along the way. You can also change the zoom level of the map if you want to see more or less of your flight path. The current flight segments are always going to be shown in magenta, and the upcoming waypoints are going to be shown in white. Clicking the buttons in the right spot can be a little bit tricky, to be honest. It's one thing that annoys me a little bit about these controls, especially when you're in the 3D cockpit. It can be really hard to click in the right spot when you're trying to do something really quickly. In my previous video on navigation, I said to use the VFR map to have a look at your flight plan. So you just press V to bring it up, and what you can do is you can just make it a little bigger if you want, and it's a whole lot easier to scroll around on this map than it's going to be on the GPS map. You can really just use the mouse on this one, and I just find it a whole lot easier than trying to bring the cursor up here and then trying to pan the screen up or down or wherever you're trying to go. There's a little bit of extra information here at the top of the MFD as well as at the top of the PFD that can be useful when you're in flight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take off now and I'll explain that all to you step by step. Alright, so I am on the runway and I'm just about to take off. So I'm going to apply full power and we're just going to get going. So you can already see that I'm pretty much on course right now, but as I'm taking off, I'm gonna be off course, and that's because I have to fly my traffic pattern to depart this airport. So as I'm taking off here, you can see on the MFD that the flight path is going to be more and more to the right as I continue my takeoff. So as soon as possible, I'm going to try and turn towards my flight path. I can obviously use the MFD on the right to have an approximate idea of what I need to do, but I'm actually going to use it along with the HSI below to have a much more accurate view of how far off track I am or how far on track I am. So at this point, I'm going to turn towards the arrow that the GPS is pointing to. So you can tell which way your flight path is by that arrow at the top of the compass and HSI. So the first thing I'm going to do is turn towards that heading, and I'm going to straighten out once I'm on that northern heading. So at this point, you can see that the flight path is well to the right of me. You can see it on the MFD, of course, but you can also see it on the HSI below. You can see the CDI part, which is that middle needle, the course deviation indicator, is telling me that the path that I need to be flying is somewhere to the right. It's not too far off to the right because it's not fully deflected. This needle can be fully deflected either to the left or the right, depending on how far off course you are. So in this case, it's about halfway between centered and fully deflected, which means I'm going to need a fair change in heading to intercept that course. So I'm going to do that now. So what I will do is I'll start by turning about 10 or 15 degrees or so, and I'm going to re-straighten the wings, and I'm going to keep flying this heading, and I'm going to keep an eye on the needle as it centers itself. You can see already that it's moving more towards the center of the HSI. You can also see it on the MFD. Obviously, we're getting closer to the flight path, but let's try and not cheat by looking at it too much. Besides, to get it really accurate, you're going to need to use the HSI. As you get closer to the course, what you're going to want to do is reduce the heading difference that you're using to intercept it. So at the moment, I am on a heading of 030, and to get to this waypoint, the desired track is 005. So what I'm going to do is, as I'm getting closer, I'm going to try and get as close as I can to 005 without getting too close so that I continue to intercept the flight path. So right there, I went from 30 degrees down to 20 degrees, and in a couple of seconds, I'll go down to 10 degrees until I'm right on top of the flight path. So at this point, I'm going to go to 10 degrees now as it comes ever closer and closer. Alright, there we go. So we've pretty much intercepted the course, so now I'm going to turn to my actual desired track, which is 005, and I'm going to hold that all the way to my waypoint. So I mentioned briefly desired track and track. Let's take a little bit of a closer look at what that actually is. The desired track, which is represented by DTK, represents the ideal line between your point of departure and your first waypoint. It's telling you to get from point A to point B that you need to fly a track of 005 over the ground. Now the next piece of information next to it is representing your actual track over the ground. Again, this one is going to be affected by the wind. So your track could potentially be different from your heading. If you've got a crosswind, obviously you're going to have to fly slightly crabbed into the wind to hold a given track. I've covered that in another video on dealing with wind, so if you need a refresher on track and heading and course, make sure to check out that video. Lastly, you also have the estimated time en route. So that assumes that you're going to keep all other variables the same. If you keep your heading the same, if you keep your airspeed the same, it's going to take me 7 minutes and 10 seconds to get to my destination. On the primary flight display, there's a few other little bits of information as well. So the first thing you can see at the top right here is you can see the active waypoint. It's telling me that I departed Montgomery Field and I am on my way to my first waypoint at the small airport that I chose along the way. I won't be landing at that airport, but it still tells me where I'm going. Next up, right next to that, there is the distance. So it's telling me how far I have to go to get to that waypoint. You can see it's going down, obviously, because I'm flying exactly towards the waypoint. So as I get closer and closer, that number is going to get smaller until I've gone over the waypoint. The last piece of information at the top there is the bearing. The bearing represents where you would have to look to see the waypoint. In this case, I'm flying exactly towards it, so the bearing is going to be 004, which makes sense because the waypoint is straight ahead. But the neat thing is that number is going to adjust itself based on where I am on the map. So I'm going to turn, let's say, to 330, and I'm going to level off the wings right there, like that. And what you can see is the bearing is actually changing because my flight path's changing. So I'm getting further and further to the left of the desired track. So the bearing towards that waypoint is going to change as I move further and further away from the flight path. So you can see it went from 6 degrees now to 7. So what that's saying is I need to look at a heading of 007 to see the waypoint. Now it's up to 008, so if I look around 008, which would be probably right about there, I'm looking straight at the waypoint. So this is going to adjust itself no matter where you are. It's always going to tell you what bearing to look at to see your waypoint. So I'll just get back myself on track right now. So I'll turn towards my heading to intercept the flight pad again. And again, I'll just apply that same logic. I'll use probably about 15 to 20 or so degrees to start to get closer to the flight path. And as I get closer and closer, I'll reduce that distance until my desired track matches my actual track. Now, the other thing to realize is that your desired track and your track could actually have the same value, but you might be way off course. So just to give you a better impression of that, what I'm going to do now is I won't get right back on track, but I will get the desired track and track to match like that. So you can see my desired track and my track are the same value, but I'm off course. Really, those two numbers don't mean much on their own. You really need to have the information of how far off you are from the waypoint. That's represented by something called the cross-track, which I don't think you can see on this model of the GPS. Well, I think you can in real life, but in the game, I don't think they've enabled it. Now you can do all of this manually, of course. You can fly your flight path all the way to your destination and not really use any of the autopilot features. But if you're trying to do other things at the same time, if you're getting ready to fly on instruments and you're flying in the clouds, you might want to hand off some of the responsibility of following the flight path to the autopilot. Doing that's actually really easy. Because we're already following the GPS flight path, all I've got to do is enable nav mode on the GPS by turning this button on right here. And then all I do is I press the engage autopilot button, and the airplane is automatically going to stay on course and follow the course all the way to its destination. So you can see I was slightly off course there, so it's going to follow it a lot more precisely than I can do by just flying the plane manually. The last thing I want to point out is that as you go across a waypoint, like I just did right now, is that the GPS is automatically going to update to the next segment of your flight. So you can see that previous segment disappeared, and the active flight path now is my next waypoint, which is from the 8CL1 airport to 54CL. It did that for me automatically. I don't need to update it. And that's pretty much all I wanted to cover with regards to GPS navigation. Obviously, this just scratches the surface of what you can do with the GPS and how you can navigate with the GPS. The point was really to give you those basics so that you can get started and get up and flying, so that you're not bogged down in all of those details. And like I mentioned, in the next videos, I'll be going into more detail about how certain features work within the GPS, because I'm going to start looking at how to do instrument flying and instrument navigation, as well as instrument landings. So until then, if you have any questions or comments, put them in the boxes below. And otherwise, if you got some value out of this video, please make sure to hit like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.